The midday sun beat down on the small town of Willow Creek, Montana. The summer of 1885 transformed the air into something heavy and suffocating. The smell of dust and tanned leather permeated the main street, where a crowd was forming in front of the Antlers Saloon. Tom McKendrick, owner of the Golden Eagle Ranch, climbed the worn steps of the saloon. His robust body cast a long shadow over the gathered men. He adjusted his dark hat, and his blue eyes swept across the crowd. "Listen well." His deep voice cut through the air. "I have at my ranch a Mustang that no man has been able to tame. The gray one." He made a calculated pause. "He's broken the ribs of 3 of the best horse tamers in the territory, and made the rodeo champion from Cheyenne swear he would never ride a wild horse again." The crowd stirred. Everyone knew the stories of the Silver Demon captured almost a year ago. "I'm betting 300 head of my best Black Angus cattle." McKendrick paused again. 300, for any man who can tame the gray one and ride him for a full 5 minutes. The silence was broken by whistles of astonishment. 300 head were worth a fortune, enough to start a respectable ranch. "Why would you do that, McKendrick?" someone shouted. "Let's say I'm bored, gentlemen, and that I enjoy a good show. Besides," he added, "I'm convinced none of you can do it." Buck Stevens, a tall, muscular Texan, stepped forward. "When do we start, McKendrick?" he asked, spitting on the ground. "Tomorrow at dawn," replied the rancher, "in the main arena of Golden Eagle Ranch. Anyone with enough courage to try should be there before dawn." While the men discussed, a solitary figure watched from the shadow of the post office. He was a thin boy, no more than 16 years old, wearing simple but clean clothes. His black hair framed a face of mixed features, part white, part native, and his dark eyes possessed an unusual depth. No one noticed when he absently touched a small, half-moon-shaped scar on his neck, nor when a flash of recognition appeared in his eyes upon hearing about the Mustang. The next morning painted the sky with shades of red and gold. Golden Eagle Ranch was already buzzing with unusual activity. Wagons and horses indicated that the news had spread quickly. The main corral had been reinforced for the occasion. Men had been working since before dawn, checking every board, every post. 30 men were already crowding around the fence, observing the gray one. The Mustang was impressive, not particularly large, but with defined musculature under the grayish coat that gleamed like silver. His long mane undulated with each movement. His amber eyes revealed a disconcerting intelligence. "That there is the devil in horse form," muttered Sam Coulter, an old white-bearded cowboy. "Look at his eyes. Too smart." Buck Stevens laughed, but with evident tension. "I've tamed worse in Amarillo." It was then that a murmur ran through the crowd. Someone pointed to the road, where a solitary figure approached. It was the same boy who had observed the announcement the day before. Up close, he seemed even younger. A red bandana tied around his neck partially covered the half-moon-shaped scar. His blue eyes carried a disconcerting determination. "Look at that," Buck Stevens guffawed. "They sent a boy to do a man's job." The laughter spread, but the boy was unaffected. He stopped in front of the group and addressed McKendrick directly. "Sir," he said firmly, "I've come to try to tame the gray one." McKendrick sized him up from head to toe. "What's your name, boy?" "Jake Carson, sir." A murmur ran through the group. "Carson." The name sounded familiar. "Do you have experience with horses, Carson?" "All my life, sir," Jake replied. "Horses have taught me more about life than any man." The response elicited smiles from the cowboys. Jake looked at the gray one, who suddenly stopped, as if feeling the weight of that gaze. "He's not bad," Jake said softly. "He's just afraid." "Afraid?" Buck Stevens interrupted. "That beast nearly killed 3 men. A cornered man fights. A horse does too. He's not bad. He's just afraid of losing what's left of his freedom." McKendrick nodded slowly. "All right, Carson, you can try your luck along with the others, but the more experienced ones go first." Jake agreed. "I'll be watching, sir. Learning." "Learning how not to break your neck, boy," Stevens mocked. Jake smiled calmly. "Maybe. Or maybe learning what you're all doing wrong." The sun climbed in the sky as the first tamers tried their luck. The crowd had grown considerably, including families, merchants, and even the local doctor. who had set up a first aid tent. Buck Stevens was the first. He chose his braided leather lasso and entered the corral confidently. The gray one kept his distance, watching the man and the threatening lasso. "Come on, boy. I'm in charge here." Stevens threw the lasso with precision, but the gray one dodged with surprising agility. On the fourth attempt, he managed to capture the Mustang, but his satisfaction lasted seconds. The gray one suddenly charged, unbalancing him and sending him into the dust. Jorge Paz, a Mexican from El Paso, tried a different approach. He entered with only aromatic herbs and began to sing softly. For promising moments, the method seemed to work. The gray one approached, curious. Paz extended his hand with the herbs, but when he raised the other to touch the animal's muzzle, the Mustang backed away and bit his sleeve. Red McCoy, an Irishman, made more progress. With impressive patience, he placed a blanket and then a light saddle on the gray one's back. The crowd watched in silence as McCoy positioned himself to mount. "He did it!" someone exclaimed when McCoy climbed onto the animal's back. The gray one remained motionless for 4 seconds, then exploded in violent movements. McCoy was thrown against the fence with enough force to crack the wood. As the day progressed, more men tried different approaches. Mike Donnelly brought a blanket with the scent of mares. Frank Williams tried to exhaust the Mustang. Peter Two Rivers used Native American techniques. All failed. As the afternoon wore on, the number of men willing to risk it visibly decreased. During all this time, Jake Carson watched in silence, murmuring to himself as if taking mental notes. "Why don't you just try, boy?" Stevens taunted. "You're losing daylight." "It's not my time yet. I'm learning." "Learning what?" "Learning how he thinks. Each horse has its own language. The gray one is shouting something that you can't hear. And you can, Magic Boy." "I'm beginning to," Jake replied, turning his attention back to the corral. At sunset, McKendrick announced the end of the attempts. "We'll continue tomorrow at dawn. The challenge remains." While the spectators dispersed, Jake remained watching the Mustang, who now grazed peacefully. "You're not a demon," Jake murmured. "You just need someone to speak your language." Night had fallen when Sarah McKendrick, Tom's daughter, approached the campfire where Jake was preparing a simple meal. At 22, Sarah was as respected as she was feared by the ranch workers. She knew how to handle a lasso and a rifle with the same efficiency with which she managed the account books. "You're not like the others," she said without preamble. Jake looked up from his coffee mug. "What gives me away?" "You're not trying to prove anything. You watch the horse as if you were reading a book, as if you actually cared about him." Jake took a sip before answering. "Have you heard of Matt Carson?" Sarah frowned. "The horse whisperer? Died about 6 years ago, wasn't it?" 6 years, 2 months and 17 days. He was my father." Sarah's eyes widened. "But Matt Carson was white?" "Yes." Jake smiled without humor. "My mother was the daughter of Chief Joseph Black Crow of the Lakota. Rising Moon was her name." A shadow of sadness crossed his face. "She died when I was born. My father raised me alone, taking me on his travels. He said I had the gift, until he tried to tame a stallion that had been tortured. The horse killed him with a kick. I was 10 years old." Sarah remained in respectful silence. "An old Lakota Indian found me afterward, wandering alone. Iron Horse taught me the ancient ways. Not how to ride or break a horse's spirit, but how to think as they think." Jake touched the scar on his neck. "This mark was from a colt I saved from drowning. Since then, I understand their language better." "And now you think you can tame the gray one?" "Not tame. Create a partnership. My father always said that the horse chooses the rider as much as the rider chooses the horse. Even with 300 head of cattle at stake? Especially with so much at stake. I cannot betray what I've learned." The next morning, more tamers tried their approaches without success. At noon, McKendrick gathered the remaining competitors. "It seems our friend Gray is even more stubborn than I imagined. Anyone else want to try?" Jake stepped forward. "I would, Mr. McKendrick, but not like the others." "How then?" "I ask for 3 days with the gray one, without trying to mount him, without ropes. Just talking." Buck Stevens guffawed. "Talking? To a horse? Going to invite him for tea, boy?" Laughter ran through the group, but Jake kept his eyes fixed on McKendrick, who studied him with interest. 3 days is a long time, and if at the end you can't ride him, then I will have failed, like all the others. Jake replied, but I don't think I'm going to fail. Prove that you're really the Whisperer's son. Show me something. Jake hesitated, then whistled. Not a common whistle, but a strange, almost hypnotic melody. The sound floated through the air, and all the horses nearby whinnied in response. Thor, McKendrick's large black horse, known for his skittish temperament, broke free of his halter and trotted over to Jake, lowering his head in reverence. An astonished silence fell over the group. 3 days, McKendrick agreed. Jake entered the corral calmly, without tools or protection. The gray one raised his head abruptly, muscles tense. Jake sat down 20 meters from the animal and began to chew aromatic roots. For hours, he did not move from his spot. The gray one, initially tense, began to relax gradually. Most spectators lost interest, but McKendrick and Sarah continued to observe. In mid-afternoon, Jake finally spoke. I know you have your reasons not to trust. I've seen the scars that the coat covers. The gray one raised his head, ears turned toward the voice. I won't touch you today or tomorrow if you don't want me to. You're the boss here. Jake continued to speak intermittently, telling stories about horses he had known, about plains where Mustangs ran free. At sunset, the gray one took 2 steps toward Jake, lowering his head slightly. Well, murmured Stevens, looks like the boy accomplished more in 15 minutes of conversation than all of us combined. On the second day, Jake brought a Lakota flute and began to play. The melody imitated natural sounds, the wind on the plains, the call of mares to their foals. The gray one began to move to the rhythm of the music, gradually approaching. When the music stopped, Jake lay down in the dust, completely vulnerable. The gray one approached, sniffing the air above the motionless boy. In the afternoon, Jake managed to offer fresh grass to the Mustang, who accepted it, touching his hand for the first time. He also brought a brush and an old saddle, allowing the gray one to examine them without pressure. What you're doing is impressive, Sarah commented. I've never seen anything like it. I'm not doing anything that my father didn't teach me. Most men want to impose their will on horses. I just try to show that my will and his can coincide. On the 3rd day, a considerable crowd gathered before dawn. Tom McKendrick called Jake before he entered the corral. I have a question. Who was your mother? Full name. Jake frowned. Rising Moon, daughter of Chief Joseph Black Crow of the Lakota. Why? McKendrick visibly paled. And your father? Matt Carson. Did he ever mention family? Brothers? I knew he had a brother somewhere in Montana, but they had fallen out. Why, Mr. McKendrick? Did you know my father? An absolute silence fell over the group. Matt Carson was my brother. The words sent shockwaves through those present. Jake visibly trembled. Impossible, he murmured. My father never mentioned a brother named Tom. He knew me as Thomas. I changed my name when I came to Montana. We fought more than 20 years ago. Matt chose to live with the Indians, learn their methods. I said terrible things, that he was a disgrace to the family. Sarah covered her mouth. Jake is my cousin? You're the brother my father mentioned? Asked Jake, the one who said he was wasting his talent with savages. McKendrick bowed his head. I was a fool. When I heard of his death, I tried to find you, but no one knew where you had gone. The challenge, Jake understood. It wasn't about the horse. It was about the Carson name. You heard about me. McKendrick nodded. Rumors of a young half-Indian who had the Whisperer's touch. I bet you would come if the prize was big enough. So the 300 head are yours by right regardless of what happens today. McKendrick stated. You are my nephew, the son of my brother. Jake absorbed the impact of the revelations. I didn't come for the cattle. I came because I heard about the gray one, and because part of me knew I would find answers here. McKendrick extended his hand. After hesitating, Jake accepted it. There's a lot for us to talk about, but first, you have a challenge to complete. Jake entered the corral for the last time, carrying only a brush and a light saddle. The gray one awaited him in the center, less apprehensive. He began by gently brushing the Mustang's tangled mane, revealing old scars, marks from spurs, whips, and even a bullet wound. "You protected your herd, didn't you?" Jake spoke softly. "That's why men hated you so much. You didn't submit." Gradually, Jake placed the blanket and the saddle, tightening the girth with slow, deliberate movements. He placed a small sack of grain on the saddle, demonstrating that weight did not mean threat. The crowd watched in silence. Finally, Jake positioned himself beside the gray one and put his foot in the stirrup. The Mustang tensed and Jake waited patiently until he relaxed again. Then, with a fluid movement, he mounted. The world seemed to stop. The gray one stood motionless, processing the new reality. After a few seconds, Jake gently pressed his knees against the animal's flanks, and it began to walk. Soon they were trotting in wide circles, then galloping smoothly. The silver demon now moved in harmony with Jake. When they stopped in the center of the corral, 5 full minutes had passed. Spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd. "He did it!" exclaimed Sarah. But the spectacle wasn't over. The gray one suddenly exploded in an impressive display of power, not to throw Jake off, but as a calculated exhibition. High jumps, quick spins, lateral movements that tested the limits of the partnership. Jake flowed with every movement, anticipating them through the subtle communication established. He's not taming it, McKendrick realized. He's liberating it. For 10 minutes, horse and rider danced around the corral, celebrating not the conquest of one over the other, but the union of forces. When they stopped, the gray one lowered his head, touching Jake's forehead with his muzzle. A gesture of absolute trust. Jake dismounted and stroked the Mustang's neck. "Thank you for your trust." McKendrick stepped forward. "The 300 head are yours, nephew, earned in the most honorable way possible." "Not yet," Jake smiled. "He has more to show me, and I to him. Our journey is just beginning." The next morning, the corral where the gray one had been confined was empty, the door ajar. "He escaped," some cowboys shouted. Jake examined the tracks. He didn't escape. He was deliberately released. See how the latch was manipulated. McKendrick's eyes narrowed. "Buck Stevens was furious last night, drinking in the saloon. I know where to find him," said Jake. "The gray one showed me in my dreams. There's a valley east of here between 2 rocky outcrops, a sacred place for wild horses." McKendrick offered help, but Jake refused. "I need to go alone. If he chose me, he'll be there waiting." Walking on foot for hours, Jake reached a hidden valley, and there was the gray one, grazing peacefully. The Mustang trotted toward him when Jake approached. "You chose to stay." Jake understood. "Not because you're tamed, but because you found trust in me." It was then that Jake noticed movements at the edges of the valley. Other wild horses appeared, the gray one's old herd. For almost an hour, Jake witnessed the gray one interacting with them, saying goodbye. In a moving moment, he seemed to transfer leadership to a young brown stallion. When the other horses departed, the gray one remained with Jake. He had chosen a new path. When they returned together to the ranch, Jake riding freely, without a saddle, they were greeted by an even larger crowd. Among them was Harrison Blackwood, a breeder from Virginia. "Boy," Blackwood called, "I have a proposition. $15,000 for the Mustang. Cash." "The horse is not for sale, sir," Jake replied. "20,000 then. My final price." "It's not a matter of price. He is not property. We made an agreement, he and I." Blackwood laughed with disdain. "It's just an animal." "Perhaps you'd like to try riding him then," suggested McKendrick. When Blackwood tried, the gray one quickly dodged, leaving the man in the dust. "As I said," Jake commented calmly, "he makes his own choices." Later, McKendrick gathered the community for the prize delivery. "About the prize," Jake announced. "I accept the 300 head, but not for me. I would like 100 to be given to Sam Coulter for his retirement, 100 for the families of the men injured trying to tame the gray one, and the remaining 100 to build a sanctuary for mistreated horses, the Matt Carson Sanctuary." McKendrick moved, embraced his nephew. "Matt would be proud, boy. Prouder than I can express." A year later, the Matt Carson Sanctuary was thriving on the lands adjacent to Golden Eagle Ranch. Under the guidance of Jake and Sarah, the sanctuary welcomed traumatized animals from throughout the region. Jake received requests for help from distant places, including from the American Army, which faced difficulties with horses assigned to the Lakota Reservation. Buck Stevens, initially the most skeptical of critics, faced his demons in a final horse-breaking competition. Jake won by demonstrating how trust and respect transformed even the most difficult horses. Stevens eventually became one of the instructors at the sanctuary. William McKendrick, Tom's youngest son, who had returned from the Civil War paralyzed, found new purpose working with horses. The gentle methods did not require strong legs, only a strong heart. The Gray One remained a living legend. He was never completely domesticated. Jake made sure he could roam freely. To the amazement of many, the Mustang always returned, sometimes bringing other wild horses. On summer nights, they reported an extraordinary sight: Jake Carson and the legendary Gray Mustang running side by side across the plains, without saddle or bridle, two free spirits united not by domination, but by mutual choice. The lesson of the Gray One and Jake transformed the way the American West treated its horses. They proved that understanding surpasses strength, that partnership wins over possession, and that the indomitable spirit, when respected, becomes the most loyal of companions. The Gray One lived to an advanced age, always half wild, half companion. He ran not because he had to run, but because he chose to, and he always came back home. The Carson name became synonymous with a revolution in the relationship between humans and horses, a legacy that began with a boy who listened to what a wild horse had to say. When Black Crow, Jake's grandfather, finally visited the sanctuary, he looked at his grandson with pride and said, "You found the middle path between two worlds. That is the bridge we all need to build."